Hello everyone, this is Ernesto with Aftershoot. Welcome to the video, and today we're gonna discuss what I think are the 3 lenses every portrait photographer should have. Let's dive right into it. Okay, so first things first, in this video, I am not gonna talk about zoom lenses because technically you can get every focal length I'm gonna mention in this video in one big chunky zoom lens. It's just big, heavy, and usually zoom lenses don't have as wide aperture as primes. So when we're talking about portrait photography, we usually want to isolate our subject from the environment. We want to focus our attention on the individual we're shooting. In those types of situations, wide apertures are great because they're going to be able to blur the background and focus more of our attention in the subject. So in this video, we're just going to talk about primes. Another thing I want to mention is we're not going to talk about brands in this video. I mean, you can shoot Nikon, Canon, Sony, Sigma, Tamron, whatever you want. What we're going to focus in is basically focal lengths. So the first focal length we're going to discuss is a fan favorite among street photographers. There's a lot of street photographers that think this is basically the only lens street photography should be shot in, and that is the 35mm focal length. In my case, I have a 35mm f1.8 by Samyang. It is very light and it is not particularly expensive, so I really beat the out of this lens. I usually use this 35mm lens when I want a full body shot of the subject I'm shooting. Let's say I'm working for a clothing brand and they want to be able to see the entire outfit. In those types of situations, I will get my 35mm lens, step back a little, and then shoot the entire subject in the environment we're shooting in. Another good thing about 35mm is it's wide enough for us to be able to tell where our subject is. We can actually see the surroundings of the subject, and 35mm is not gonna blur the background as much so that we don't even know where that person is standing. Now, one thing to avoid with 35mm lenses is getting too close to your subject because it is still a wider lens, and the closer you get to your subject, the more you're gonna distort or deform them. So I would use this basically for full body or maybe half body images. Now try to avoid getting the face too close to the corners because that's where you're gonna see more distortion. Now another fun favorite amongst portrait photographers is the 85mm focal length. In this case, I have a Samyang 85mm f1.4. Now again, I don't care about the brand, it's just about the focal length in this video. So let's say I'm working with the same clothing brand I mentioned with the 35mm lens, and I already got the full body shot, and now they want me to take a closer shot, a tighter shot to be able to show the shirt or just the pants. In those kinds of situations, like I mentioned, getting closer to the subject with a 35mm might end up deforming or distorting the image. So it is then that I choose the 85mm focal length because it is gonna get me closer to the subject and it is not gonna distort the image. Now 85mm is great to get tighter portraits, and it's also amazing to be able to blur even more your background. In this case, this lens is an f.4, so it's gonna generate more background blur than an f1.8, and the fact that it is an 85mm lens is gonna actually make the background look even blurrier. So if you're in a situation where you wanna blur the background so much that you can barely tell what's happening, then you would get your 85mm lens, you would get a little closer to your subject, open that aperture and just shoot away. Now the third lens I'm gonna mention in this video is a lens a lot of people buy when they feel they've outgrown their kit lens, and that is the famous 50mm lens or the Nifty 50. Now I do not own a 50mm lens, but I do have a 55mm f1.5 lens that I use like if it was a 50mm lens. So this focal length for me is like an in-betweener. It's not as wide as a 35, but I can still get a full body shot, and it's not as tight as an 85, but I can still get a close-up without distorting the subject. Again, this being an f1.8 lens means I'm gonna get a nice background blur, not as blurry as the 85, but definitely blurrier than a 35mm lens. I've used this lens for many studio scenarios, I've shot some corporate portraits too, and a lot of different situations where I just don't want to be switching between the 35 and the 85. Like I said, this is a good in-betweener, so if I want a wider shot, I just need to step back a little and I use my 55 and it will still include some of the environment, and if I want a tighter shot, I just get closer and I'm not too afraid to deform or distort my subject. So there you go, those are my 3 favorite lenses for portrait photography. Again, that's just my personal opinion. my personal appreciation. I would love to know what's your favorite lens for portrait photography. Leave a comment below telling us what lens you use when you're shooting portraits. Don't forget to follow us in all of our social media to be up to date with what Aftershoot has to offer, and I'll see you in the next one.